As night fell over our small town, the wind made a hushed sound through the trees. Jake, a friend of mine, and I were standing at the edge of the woods and gazing at the foreboding outline of the derelict structure in front of us. The moon's weak glow cast eerie shadows that danced on the crumbling walls, and its broken windows stared back like hollow eyes. It was the ideal location for a nighttime adventure. My voice trembled as I questioned Jake. "What do you think, Jake? Should we do it?" Jake grinned, the soft glow of his flashlight bathing his face. "Undoubtedly, man. We've been discussing this for weeks. We will finally visit the old mill tonight." A remnant of the town's industrial past, the mill had been closed for decades. Strange occurrences, including muffled screams, unsettling voices, and ghostly apparitions, were rumored to occur within the building's crumbling walls. We were drawn in by the allure of the unknown, which squelched any sensible fears of danger. The chill in the air grew stronger as we drew near the crumbling entrance. There was something or someone lurking in the shadows, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that we were being watched. I dismissed it as just nerves, though, and I went in after Jake. Both the outside and the interior were foreboding. The air was thick with the musty smell of dampness, and rotting wooden beams stretched overhead. We made an eerie symphony of creaks and groans as our footsteps reverberated through the empty room. Walls covered in graffiti depicted the experiences of those who had entered before us. Our flashlights sliced through the night like blades as we investigated room after room. But there was something strange about this place. Each room seemed overly tidy, as if the cobwebs and dust had just been removed. Uncomfortably, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I muttered, my voice barely louder than a breath, "Jake, do you think we're alone in here?" The man gave me a pale-faced glance. The same thing crossed my mind, "Man. If we don't find anything, let's just finish looking around this floor and then go back." We moved forward reluctantly. The underground chamber appeared to be reached after moving through a series of connected rooms. Our flashlights revealed a secret staircase that descended into the shadows. I questioned, my heart thumping in my chest, "Should we check it out?" Jake nodded, concealing his unease behind his determination. Our cautious ascent of the rickety stone stairway was accompanied by barely audible footfalls. With each step, the temperature dropped and a strange, metallic smell filled the air. Our flashlights' beams illuminated a terrifying scene as we descended. Rows of metal crates, each one tightly sealed, were arranged in the chamber. Invisible to prying eyes, it resembled a hidden storage space. I hesitated as I walked up to one of the crates and tried to pry it open. I discovered piles of cash inside. There were tons of cash everywhere you looked. As I came to the conclusion that we had discovered a criminal's underground lair, my heart began to race. The local legends focused on criminals rather than ghosts. Jake barely heard my hushed words. "We must leave this place immediately." A shuffling sound resounded throughout the room as we turned to leave. We stood still, the flashlights in our hands trembling. Unmasked men in dark clothing emerged from the shadows with their faces covered. One of them hissed in an ominous tone, "You weren't supposed to find this place," as they stood there. As the realization set in, fear tightened in my chest. We had unintentionally found the thieves' covert hideout. There was no way to get away from them or outrun them. Like rats in a maze, we were confined. With his eyes gleaming with ill will, the group's leader advanced. "It appears that we have some unexpected guests, boys. Make certain they never depart." As our options became more limited, Jake and I exchanged terrified looks. We had entered the shadows in search of adventure, but what we discovered was much more sinister. As the first blow was delivered, I realized that our night had taken a terrifying turn that we could never have imagined as the robbers closed in with their intentions clear. Intense pain radiated throughout my body as I collapsed to the ground as the blow landed with a sickening thud. Jake was similarly unwell, lying sprawled out next to me and feeling confused. The robbers advanced, their ominous laughter resonating off the stone walls of the chamber. An adrenaline rush was sparked in me by my desperation. I had to act quickly. I fumbled for my bag and grabbed my phone. I pressed the emergency button in the hopes that someone would hear the noise and send assistance. Although it was unlikely, it was our only chance. I could make out one of the robbers raising a menacing-looking object, ready to launch another attack, in the low light. As I frantically typed a message to the nearby police, time seemed to slow down. After that, I threw my backpack at the attacker with all of my remaining strength. He was startled and stumbled back as it hit him square in the face. That was all the diversion we required. Despite the pain shooting through our bodies, Jake and I struggled to stand. Our flashlights were bouncing wildly in our hands as we ran toward the stairs. The robbers yelled and ran after us, but we were driven by panic and desperation. The air was punctured by sirens as we ascended the stairs. The robbers fled into the shadows as blue and red flashes from the oncoming police cars lit up the entrance to the mill. We were left alive, but terrified and panting as our pursuers vanished into the night. Just as the robbers were about to flee, the police arrived and caught them. They had undervalued the ingenuity of two scared teenagers. We were led home after giving our statements, our adrenaline still pumping as we described the terrifying ordeal. A criminal investigation focused on the abandoned mill in the days that followed. The secret hideout of the thieves was revealed, and the looted funds were recovered, unintentionally exposing a dangerous criminal enterprise that the locals had previously only heard tales about. Our adventure. Jake and I came out of that terrifying experience with a newfound respect for caution and a profound understanding of the strength of desperation. We discovered that ghoulish tales and very real dangers could both be hidden in the dark. Our exploration of the abandoned mill had changed from a thrill-seeking adventure into a profound lesson about the value of being cautious and well-prepared, even in the presence of uncertainty. I'd always felt uneasy about the derelict structure next to my house. An old, deteriorating building with broken windows and ivy-covered walls stood there, appearing to try to drag itself into the ground. It was an artifact from a bygone era, a place no one dared to visit, and for good reason. Years had passed as I had watched it from my bedroom window, its gloomy silhouette looming over our quiet suburban neighborhood like a menacing sentinel. Every night I'd catch a glimpse of some strange lights flickering inside its crumbling walls, like ghosts trying to flee their never-ending prison. I always dismissed the rumors that the locals would whisper about hauntings and strange apparitions seen during the moonlit hours as urban legends. Prior to the evening I saw them, that is. I was getting ready for bed on a brisk autumnal evening when I became aware of a faint glow coming from the abandoned structure. I initially believed it might be an optical illusion caused by the light, a passing car's reflection, or my eyes being deceived by the moon. But as I got even closer, my heart started to beat quickly. There were people inside. Not just one or two, but a large group of them. They were silent as they moved in stiff, unnatural ways. Their pale faces and lifeless eyes, which resembled hollow sockets where darkness resided, were visible in the flickering candlelight. I was unable to turn away because my curiosity overcame me. I put my coat on and quietly crossed the backyard into the overgrown field that stood between my home and the derelict structure. While the moon cast long, ominous shadows, the grass moaned beneath my feet. As I drew nearer, my breath began to mist in the chilly air, and my heart began to race. I hid behind a moss-covered pillar when I got to the building's deteriorating facade and peered through a broken window. My spine tingled as a result of what I saw. Eyes glued to a hideous altar in the middle of the room, the crowd was huddled in a circle. Strange symbols and candles that burned with otherworldly light were placed on the altar. I couldn't understand the chanting coming from the figure in the center of the circle who was wearing a torn robe. He spoke in a guttural, low drone that made my bones seem to tremble. The dagger's blade was glinting ominously in the candlelight as the figure raised it above his head, horrifying me as I watched. The other members of the circle started chanting together, raising their voices in an obnoxious chorus. The figure then swiftly and deliberately stabbed a young woman who was lying on the altar in the heart. As I watched the horrific scene, a scream nearly came out of my throat. The altar was covered in blood, and a sinister energy seemed to pulse throughout the space. The figures kept chanting while gazing intently at the corpse in front of them. It was a ritual, an evil and irrational ceremony that defied logic. My mind was spinning as I stumbled back from the window. Fear gripped me, and I knew I had to get away from there, to alert the authorities, to put an end to whatever madness was going on inside that building. I wondered what I had just seen, who were these people, and what they were doing in that cursed place. My heart was thumping in my ears as I made my way back through the field. I was brave enough to take one final look behind me as I entered the security of my own backyard. The night was once more silent and still, with no longer any glow from the abandoned building. My voice trembled as I described what I had seen to the police as I ran inside my home and made the call. They arrived quickly, but when they went inside the abandoned structure, they only found dust and rot. Nothing to support my story was found, including any bodies or ritualistic evidence. I had a terrifying epiphany after that. People I had seen that night were like phantoms, disappearing without a trace, and the building next to my home held secrets I could hardly fathom. Since the darkness that inhabited the deserted building was a terror that could not be easily forgotten, I knew at that moment that I would never feel secure in my own home again. As I struggled to comprehend what I had seen, days turned into restless nights. Police dismissed my account as a hallucination or a fever dream and ended their investigation. My family and friends believed I had gone insane, and I couldn't really blame them. The events of that evening seemed unbelievable, like they belonged in a horror film. I, however, couldn't help but feel as though I was onto something, that there was more to that deserted building than first appeared. I started looking through old newspapers and town records to learn more about its past. I got goosebumps when I saw what I found. The structure was once a house of worship, a church from the early 19th century. Years prior, it had been abandoned and condemned following a string of unexplained deaths and disappearances that were connected to the congregation. The church's leaders were allegedly involved in occult activities, and the structure was purportedly cursed. I became obsessed with finding the truth after learning this new information. I pored over occult books for hours, trying to make sense of the symbols I had seen on the altar. Even during the day, I ventured back to the abandoned building, but it was still there, dead and empty. The glow reappeared one fateful night when the moon was low in the sky. This time, I was determined to get answers because the building was bustling with activity. I watched as the figures reassembled around the bizarre altar as I snuck up on them while hiding in the shadows. The chanting started, using the same unsettling, otherworldly language that had terrorized my dreams. I held my breath while waiting for the terrifying scene to play out as the figure in the torn robe raised the dagger once more. A sudden gust of wind, however, put out the candles and completely darkened the room before the dagger could strike. The figures screamed and tripped over each other as chaos broke out inside the deserted building. I jumped at the chance and moved quickly forward, ready to face them. A scene of madness greeted me as I stormed through the door. The figures were now clearly visible in the dim moonlight, their faces twisted in agony. As I watched, the altar itself appeared to deteriorate and wither as the dagger sat abandoned on the ground. I watched in horror as the structure itself appeared to rebel against the evil that had long plagued it. Walls started to show signs of damage, and the ivy that had clung to the building started to wilt and die. It appeared as though the structure itself had turned against the occupants. The figures fled into the night, their influence broken, and vanished into the shadows. The atmosphere was foreboding as I stood by myself in the crumbling ruins. The abandoned building's former den of darkness had been extinguished, but at what cost? I jerked awake, feeling lost and shivering in the dark, chilly distance. In addition to having physical pain, I was mentally confused and foggy. My eyes adjusted to the weak light coming in through broken windows, and I realized I was on a threadbare mattress in what seemed to be an abandoned building. As I tried to piece together the circumstances that had brought about this nightmare and how I had come to be in this situation, panic tore at the edges of my consciousness. The space was deserted, and the walls were splattered with graffiti that appeared to be scars from a long-gone past. The empty room reverberated with the ominous creaking sound of the rusted pipes that snaked along the ceiling. I felt like I had taken some sort of drug because when I tried to move, my limbs felt heavy. My panic turned to terror as I became painfully aware of the restraints holding my wrists and ankles to the bed frame. I fought to escape the restraints while my heart was racing, but they held. I didn't notice him until I turned my head to the side. He was lurking in the darkness, his eyes gleaming with vengeance. My spine tingled at the thought of him being there. He appeared as a tall man in the shadows. "You're finally awake," he said in a low, guttural whisper that sent chills down my already worn-out spine. "Who are you, and what do you want?" I stumbled while speaking. As he moved closer, his twisted features were on display, and the corners of his mouth played a menacing smile. A cruel mask that looked like it had been taken from a nightmare covered his face, which was a canvas of wounds and malformations. "That's irrelevant right now," he retorted with a venomous tone in his voice. There is no way out, so it's important that you're here with me." As I frantically thrashed against my restraints, I screamed in fear. The room started to feel like a prison, with its walls closing in around me as the man circled like a vulture, relishing my fear. I caught a glimpse of a nasty-looking knife that was glinting in his hand as he drew nearer. This made me feel even more horrified. "You're not the first," he hissed, his hot, foul breath rubbing against my ear. "And you also won't be the last." I was trying to escape this nightmare, and my mind was racing. I couldn't allow myself to become sucked into his vicious game and become yet another victim. Using my bound legs, I kicked him in the chest with all the courage I could muster. His grip on the knife only just became loose enough for me to yank my wrist free as he fell back. Adrenaline was pumping through my veins as I fought to free my other limbs. I was able to roll off the bed and onto the cold, hard floor as the man lunged at me as he quickly recovered. I felt a jolt of pain as I hit the ground, but I ignored it and stumbled toward the shattered window, stumbling to my feet. On the other side, I fell into a tangle of branches after shattering the broken glass. When I felt the sting of shattered glass and the chilly air outside, I was fully awake. There was no more time I could afford to waste. Running down a narrow hallway, my bare feet stomped on the debris-covered floor. The man was screaming angrily behind me, but I didn't turn around. My heart was pounding in my chest as I started to descend an old staircase. The night seemed never-ending, and every step seemed to take an eternity. Finally, gasping for air, I dashed through a doorway and into a moonlit alley. Although my body was battered and my clothes were torn, I was free. My frantic steps echoed through the deserted streets as I ran, continuing until I reached the safety of a nearby gas station. I huddled in the warmth of the convenience store, telling the clerk about my horrifying experience as she called the police. The days that followed were a blur of declarations, police questioning, and medical examinations. The man who had kidnapped me was nowhere to be found despite their search of the abandoned building. The emotional and physical scars persisted despite their assurances that they would use all available resources to track him down. I found out that I'd been drugged, taken against my will, and that the man had been keeping me in that abandoned place for some reason that I didn't know. I was still alive, and that was the most important thing. My physical and mental health had suffered as a result of the nightmare. As the years passed, I made an effort to put the terrifying experience behind me, but I was unable to get rid of the memory of that crazy man or the atrocities he had made me endure. I couldn't help but wonder if he was still hiding out in the darkness, watching for his next victim. I was certain that I would never take my freedom for granted again, and that the nightmares would serve as a constant reminder of the potential danger lurking just around the corner.